Yeah. So good evening, everyone, and good evening, Shanta. Lovely to see you, and I'm so happy that we could have this session together. It was my dream for so many years to listen to you and let my students know about you and my colleagues to know about you. So at last, I think Corona, the silver lining of Corona is that it has made this possible. Everyone is in webinar, and that's why we are also, I think, we have made this happen. Now, to everyone, I will just give a brief introduction of Santa, the things that I haven't told in the brief bio that I've sent her. First thing is that we come from the same place. So that makes me so proud of her. The next important thing is that though I knew about her since childhood, I first came to know about her in London when she was the director of Poetry in the House, and she was hosting a monthly poetry readings at Lauderdale House, very near my house where I was staying in London. And that was the first time I was impressed with her reading style, with her organizing style and things like that. And then when I got interested, I came to know how she has dabbled between poetry, banking, and things like that, the interdisciplinary subjects that we are talking about now. She is a living example of how if you have inclination and if you have motivation, you can make interdisciplinary learning or interdisciplinary professions seem so easy. So she kind of fits into that example which all of us are perhaps trying to make happen. Like I also write poetry, but I can't call myself yet a poet. I can call myself comfortably a teacher. But she is one who fits into her different roles very easily and comes out of that easily also. When I see her, she appears like a friend of mine from my homeland, where I can talk about everything starting from food to pujas and everything. And in London also, she fits into the English Poets Society like she was one of them. You can't make out the difference. So that's all about her personality, and which I know. And we will ask her questions about how she made the transition between literature and banking and things like that over. But right now, her preoccupation is mainly with writing. And as she was narrating to me yesterday, she finds that writing fiction or writing poetry comes spontaneously, and for the other kinds of writing that she will talk about herself, you need to do research and things like that. So all this kind of, but above all, Shanda is a voice that's very pleasing to hear. So I will give, without wasting time, I will kind of ask her to read some of her poems. Of course, like while we were talking now, she has poetry on everything, starting from shadi.com to urban life to Nataraj in the museum, to everything she has under. So it is up to us what we want to listen. So whatever I could, I just requested her. So I will ask her to read a poem. Of course, it's her choice what she wants to read, but one of my favorites was one she wrote about Shiva and Parvati, and her reflection on their statue or whatever. She will explain it better. I can, because it is a pre-Diwali kind of an occasion, and she has a poetry on Diwali. So let's ask her to start with that Diwali poem, and then she can read a few poems. And all of you, please, I would like you to get involved. And if you have any questions from her, or if you want to know about her poetry writing, her creative writing, or her professional life as a banker, or her life as a student at Oxford, or as a first woman batch of students at Worcester College in University of Oxford, you can ask her any questions. She is more than happy to answer them. So let's start with her poem on Diwali. Santa, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Gopa, for the wonderful introduction. And as requested, I will start with this poem about Diwali. I had a fever this poem is about, it's called Fever in Diwali. And as we have, Diwali coming up, as Gopa has requested, I'd like to start with the poem. Pious neighbors celebrated Diwali with neat rows of oil lamps, promising the destruction of evil. My fever flew fast through the coil of night, setting ablaze the desolate sky, like a child conspiring with confetti stars. Harassed doctors came with tablets, magic miniature moons, with syrup in exorcist cups and hermetic brew. While the snake charmer's fluted thermometer grinned its flinted fangs wider and wider, I ate moons and laughed at stars. My limbs could have even danced a few steps to appease evil with the grace of lightning in a storm-ripped sky, like blue-throated Shiva with snakes in red matted hair. White-sheeted, I lay still like an Indian monkey in summer. So that's Fever in Diwali. I have to say that while I came to finance late in the day, poetry came first to me. And I think writing, I used to write poems and short stories when I was in school. And it helped me to not only express myself, but also it gave me clarity of thought, of thinking, which I think is quite important in life. If you can think clearly, if you can think for yourself, it's an important contribution because it leads to self-knowledge. And I think it helped me even as an investor, the ability to cut through all the crap and to think for yourself. Okay, I thought I should mention that in case I forget the importance of poetry. And this is meeting Shiva and Parvati in the British Museum. As you know, the British Museum has exhibits from all over the world, and there are various images from India, and there's one from Orissa as well. And this poem was written some years ago, and in those days, you used to be able to, well, at least when I go into, and when I saw this image, there were flowers and other offerings at the bottom of the image, just as we do back in temples in India, which I don't think is happening any longer because there's so much sort of security and everything else in our modern world. Pity. So here we go. Meandering like a river among the exhibits I encounter, Shiva and Parvati engrossed in each other, holding the universe between their eyes. Startled to find an offering of flowers nestling at their feet, where Nandi, Shiva's bull, and Parvati's lion gaze bashfully at each other. This statue from Orissa, the place of my birth, carved between AD 1100 and 1300, on gleaming black schist, demands my attention. I am in the presence of God, conceived as a couple, male and female, on the point of becoming one. Over 2 centuries have elapsed since the divine pair, dressed lavishly in decorated loincloths, their naked bodies adorned with ornaments, earrings, necklaces, headdresses, anklets, were taken from their home in an ornate temple, perhaps in Bhubaneswar, the abode of gods, where worshippers thronged for a darshan, offering gifts and prayers, holding conversations with gods that began in the temple and were carried on every day, everywhere. Here the gods sit silently contemplating the world and each other, oblivious of a broken-hearted believer. Have you forgotten your daughter? How long must I suffer alone, buffeted by life's crosswinds, before I find shelter? next poem I could read, it's called Shunya. And Shunya, actually, as a concept, has existed a long time before it was really got life in India in the mid 15th century. And then it traveled to China, Islamic countries, and actually reached Western Europe in the 12th century. And today we can't imagine life without Shunya. It is such a fundamental concept in every aspect of our lives. So sometimes ideas take a long time to travel to be realized. Shunya. It took centuries, the journey from cipher, invisible wedge, a thing of no importance to zero, point of reckoning, piece of the unknown fathomed, being counted, standing solidly, three-dimensional, vanishing mystery, altering lives forever, establishing one's significance in space, time, trade, science, lending the world order, measuring phenomena, not just the freezing point of water, creating certainty, holding things together. Shunya, vessel taking the shape of whatever is poured into it, godlike, containing everything and nothing, pregnant with possibility, poised between positive, negative, life and death, vanishing point, knowing infinity, drawing down divinity, reflecting some of the universe, reducing all to itself, always transforming. Okay. Now the next poem is actually sort of a link between a whole load of issues that I'm concerned about. And it's called What You Don't Know. And all these poems also appear in my book Imagine, New and Selected Poems that was published in India. So you can get hold of a copy of the book if you'd like to read. And as I said, what you don't know is something we we realize in our lives, but we don't always appreciate the extent of it. So, for example, when I was younger, you thought everybody was like you, or you understood your friends because they were your friends. But then life teaches you that you never really get to understand other human beings. Not really. You think you do, but it's very elusive. People are very different from what you think they are. You are very different from what others think you are. Then when I joined the city, now city is the financial district in London. So when I started working in finance, I found that a lot of the people actually didn't know what they were doing about. I mean, people were making money. But when you had the crash in 2008, by which time I was already at London Business School, there were actually very few people who actually knew what happened. I mean, they were supposed to know, even people, the regulators, the people in power, very, very senior people actually didn't know what was going on. And this is not new. It's been going on for as long as I can remember, that people not knowing what they're doing. Which then led me to think about, we have the Hindu definition of God as neti neti, and which is basically not this, not this. So anything you can define is not God. And that somehow sort of brings together all these different strands of this strange world we live in, where we actually know so little of what is really going on. And that I find very satisfying, in the sense that, so when some people are very conceited, they think they know a lot about everything, but actually when you think about it, they don't. Nobody does. So we are all looking at the tip of the iceberg, and there is a lot more to know. And so this process of evolution will go on forever. And one thing about the markets, which I failed to mention, is that what you know, everybody else knows. So what affects stock prices is actually what you don't know. Because so these sort of surprises, these huge surprises where you had the crash sort of in March earlier this year when the markets fell, people had no idea what was going on. And even recently, just 2 weeks ago, the markets took a dive because they were worried about the virus, about who's going to win the election. So this whole question of knowing and not knowing also reflects on stock prices. So, okay, with that a bit of introduction, I will read what you don't know. As a child, you instinctively know there are things you don't know. You also know you know of things the adults think you don't know. Growing up is a process of knowing you don't know, acknowledging that others might know, though they don't know that you don't know. Wisdom comes when you can forget what you know, when you know your parents, friends, lovers, well wishers, even your enemies, your best teachers don't know. For what is worth knowing is what you don't know. Some people are born plain lucky. They sail through life without knowing they don't know. And not knowing they don't know what is worth knowing protects them from a lifetime of unknowing. For most of us, there is a price to be paid. Most of us get damaged, more or less, in the process, and end up knowing what is not worth knowing. So, how are we doing? I could read one more poem before we open up for questions or something.
Yeah, but you have already given us so much of material to think about that this knowing and not knowing is really deep philosophical thoughts. I would like everyone, if you have any questions or you want to participate in the discussion, let's make it interactive. So put your questions on the chat box, or you can straight away unmute yourself and ask Shanta any questions. She will read her this poem, and then we are open to interaction, and then we will kind of take it to another session, if that's okay with you.
Now, this poem is more addressed at young people, or actually anybody really, old people too, because not all older people know themselves. So, what is this? It's called Nothing More Real Than You. The world may appear to be your oyster. Remember, it is not yours to keep or conquer. You may never discover why you are here if you have a special place in the universe. There may be planets inhabited by creatures infinitely more intelligent and conscious than us. By the time you figure out most things you believed in are flawed, half a century will have disappeared. Things change faster than you can imagine, leaving you running in the same spot, quick as you can. No point in prizing open your priceless treasure with a sword. Nothing worth having is won by force. Build, therefore, your own world. If you start early, you might learn to make a home of it eventually. Explore the vast continents of yourself. Nothing in this world is real, nothing more real than you. Okay.
That kinds of give us a nice preface to open up the discussion. Now, I would like you to answer one of the questions that I have faced as an outsider in the Western world, and you seem to have seamlessly merged into that Western world, and people have acknowledged your poems everywhere. How do you find that these Eastern concept of, let's say, Shiva and Parvati and Diwali? Now Diwali is celebrated all over the world, even US, White House makes a speech, Boris Johnson makes a speech. But when you were there, perhaps it was not that much of a norm. And how did you wade through all this cultural aspects of your poetry, which has a strong roots in culture. Some of your poems are very, very, what I should say, culture neutral, but some of your poems are very much rooted in the culture. And as you kind of ended your poem by knowing yourself, so I think your culture comes from yourself. So how was this journey from yourself to that? I mean, when you must have gone, it must have been a foreign culture. Of course, now it has become your home and you must be very much at peace there. So take us. And there's one question from a student. Ma'am, where do you find the inspiration to write? This was one of my first questions to Shanta, actually. And what would your favorite piece of literature, if you could recommend one to us? Yeah, so this.
Okay, there's various issues here, and I will try to address them one by one. When I arrived in this country in 1979, it was a completely different world. You cannot even imagine, compare. And when I worked in the city, I was rarely, there was another woman, definitely not Indian. There were a couple of, English and Americans, but I think at Morgan Stanley in my department, I was certainly the only one. And it was later at Bearings, we had an American. So it was a completely different world, and there was a lot of discrimination. But the British are very, very diplomatic. They're not blatant. So it was very submerged. In Oxford, I had very good support structure. I had good friends, and my professors were very supportive. So it was a different world. But I'm actually writing about these issues in my second novel, and it is. I have been lucky to the extent that I probably must have had a very good sense of who I am, not fully defined, obviously, but a very good idea of me as Indian. And I'm sort of reluctant to say Hindu in the sense that Hinduism has gone in a way that I probably wouldn't even understand today's India. But my India was a very liberal India. And I was blessed to that extent that we grew up, and family that I grew up in was very liberal too. So it helped me to sort of hold on to myself while I was trying to adjust. And I think Hinduism, this neti neti, this whole idea, it's openness, its open-endedness is hugely. It's a good thing. It's really I think if you're born into that open-ended idea of the world, and the whole world is your family, um, and to have read even sort of Rabindranath Tagore comes to mind. He was truly a very open. I mean, he did not like nationalism in his time, and so you can imagine what a different human being he was. And so I think this whole emphasis on the individual of being yourself, but you can only be yourself if you find out who you are. And for that, it actually helps to see the other. So when you come here, but I had gone to a convent school, so I was open to Christianity. We used to read the Bible, the original St. James's version of the Bible, and I love reading the Bible and the stories in it, which is, the new read of the Mahabharata, Gita, and even the Quran, and the underlying spiritual basis of most religions are very similar. The only difference is that Hinduism is very, very open. So you can actually be a Hindu and survive in other societies, but religion is not an important factor. It's the way of thinking, how you see the world, because religion interferes with who you are. And I think the more the world becomes or realizes that we are all essentially human beings first, and then everything else. So I'm a human being first, and then a woman, and Indian, and all the other, even a poet, that will not come first, some people may say. I'm a poet first, but I think I would say I'm a human being first, because that is most important link between all of us. And what links us all is that humanity, which we increasingly we need to realize that that's our first identity. And regarding what inspires me to write, I don't know. I've always been writing, you see, so even from a very young age. So, and I write about anything that comes to mind. And I think originally I wrote because I suppose as a woman, well, your views are not really always welcome or appreciated, whether it's in India or in the West. It's the same actually. The West is no less, or India is no less, whatever the word is, intolerant than the West. So everybody is intolerant. But I think writing serves a completely different purpose, in the sense it clarifies your own thoughts. And the process of writing, as I said before, it made me see things, because if you can write clearly, if you can think clearly, you realize the flaws in your own argument. And then you see that what you have written is actually not correct, or you have to change it or improve it. And that is a process of clarification, not just of writing, but you as a human being. And so I can write about anything, but my themes are very wide ranging, from all sorts of issues. Anything can inspire a poem. So one of your students, I think, who was it? She asked a question: "What inspires me to write?" It could be anything, but I have to feel about. I have to feel strongly about it, feel passionately about it. Otherwise, the poem won't have the same impact or the same effect. And I think most people have that issue, that if you're passionate about something, and it's the same in life, if you lead a life that is full of passion, you are a lucky person. And what my favorite piece? There are too many favorites, so it's very difficult to say that. Oh, so many, because I just wouldn't sort of. I don't know, offhand. I think because Louise Gluck won the Nobel Prize recently. I think her Wild Iris, it's a collection of poems. I really liked that book of hers, or Toni Morrison's Beloved, or there are too many books that I would recommend as students, or just anybody to read, because they would they would change you. I think they will make a difference to your life. Okay, I hope that helps to some extent.
Navriti is one of our colleagues. She teaches French here.
Right, okay.
She's asking you a question. You can read it on the chat box. Can you, or should I read it for you? Theme stories on investing in India and asset management. Of course, we will ask her this question. It's one of my very intriguing questions. I mean, that's one thing I'm very impressed about Shanta, is that because perhaps I come from literature and humanities, so writing a poem, poetry or something like that, it is not very I don't consider it a very difficult feat. But of course, someone going from literature and doing asset management and banking, it was completely out of the world for me. I mean, I couldn't imagine anyone doing this. But she puts it very, very simply, as she says, if you know yourself, then you know. But we will ask her more about her journey and how she managed and how she went into it and wrote books about it also, and then went on. I mean, it was I think I'll leave it to her to describe it. I mean, how did you go into it, and what did you gain out of it, and how did you enjoy it, and things like that.
It's a very interesting question, because it's such a fundamental part of my life's journey. Because when I was growing up in India, when I came to Oxford, when I got the scholarship to Oxford, I was going to teach English. I have a DPhil in English, and I was at Harvard for 2 years teaching there. So finance was not, anywhere in my radar. So it was basically, of course, money matters in each stage of your life, because When I came to Oxford, the scholarship was so meager that you could barely survive on it. But you need a job to really continue, and there were no teaching jobs. I'm talking of the mid 80s, early 80s, because I mean, we are nowadays talking of economics sort of cycles, and everybody understands that. But these cycles have been going on forever because the academic industry expanded a lot in the 60s. And by the time I was looking for a job after my DPhil, extraordinarily, there were no jobs in teaching. I mean, even today, there are not that many DPhils in English in the world. And at that point in time, I couldn't get a job, not in India, not in the West. And nobody, it's not just me, all the students, all my friends, they were looking for a job. But here in the West, at least in the UK, they could sign on and get, help from the government. But that was not open to an overseas student. So I had to find a job if I wanted to carry on living here. And so it was that I must have sent out hundreds of applications, at least 100, and I got only one reply from JP Morgan. And I thought, okay, if they're going to hire me, give me a job, and I have a DPhil in English, then sure, I'm going to work for them. But I didn't really know much of a difference between JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley. And when I was interviewed by both of them, and Morgan Stanley said, well, when do you want to start? Start tomorrow. So, and I really needed a job. I really needed money. I had absolutely no money at all. And so I started, and I actually learned a lot of things which I would have never learned if I had stayed on in normal academia. How the world is run is something I've learned. And so, and I've gained a lot in understanding how things are. But there was a lot of, unfortunately, at that time, the world, as I said, is different place, and I was not rewarded the way I should have because I did extremely well for all my the companies I worked for. I set up the India Fund for Morgan Stanley, also at Bearings. So I'm. It's a pity that I was not recognized for the contribution I made. But that's how it is, and I don't know. I'm told the world has changed, and I hope it has, and that women are being better recognized for their contribution. So, it's sort of it's interesting, or at least to that extent, that I believe that in life we always tell ourselves that we have to plan our lives, that you have to do this, that you have to plan, but then life has its own plan also. So I had other plans, and the choices life offered to me were fine. And the books are also very interesting because I was in India, and I was running the sort of the India funded Bearings, and then Bearings collapsed. So all my hard work went down the tube. And then basically I was talking to a publisher, to a friend about, and I said, well, I have all these poems in a book of poems, and would like to publish them. And then she suddenly said, well, if you write a book about India, because I was investing in India and I was among the very first investors in India, we would be very interested to publish that. And that's how investing in India came. And I wasn't planning to write a book about India. So that was my first book, which was very nice. It was by Macmillan. And I presume it's still a kind of reference book till today. And I suppose I could write. So we could write about anything really if you're a writer. Technically, you can write about anything. Poetry is different. Poetry is a different skill. And but now there are poetry schools here today, so they're teaching people how to write. And I'm sure if you're already a poet, you will benefit from going to a poetry school. But I never went to any poetry school. And all the three books in finance, even the second book, I was commissioned to write the second book about equities, And then the third book also came out as a result of the appointment at London Business School. So it's very interesting that how all the finance books are by major publishers, and yet poetry, which is something I have been writing all my life, it's only with HarperCollins they finally put together this new and selected poems, which is available in India. I think Rupa sort of published my first collection of poems in India, thanks to Keki Daruwala. But then the poetry books nobody reads actually or buys them. You know, it's a pity. People buy novels, but very few people buy poetry books. So, you know, publishers have to make money. So basically, poetry books tend to go out of print within 5-6 years. So it's a pity because I think a really good poem can it tells you a lot within a few lines, you know. And as I write novels too, so I know that how hard it is also to actually write a good novel. So I'm not, and I appreciate fully the value of a really good novel. I don't know if this answered any of the questions raised, but
I think it did.
okay, good.
I think it's very inspiring to know that someone from literature can go to finance and write books about it, and tell our young students that writing a book is anyone can write a book. So I hope they are listening and they will take it seriously. And so now, are there any more questions, or should we go to the last part of our poetry reading? So where Shanda will read some of her favorite poems. Um, is that all right? Or anyone has any other questions? Students, do you have, or my colleagues from the Language Center, Neha, Shilpa, any questions? Or should we go to the next bit of our session? I think we will start with the next part.
Okay. I thought I might read, as there are not that many poems written about working in the city. I thought I would read this poem called City Slickers, which I wrote when I was still at Bearings. But in those days, the Irish Republican Army used to plant bombs in London, and 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 this poem was written after one of those occasions. It was on the 24th of April, 1993, such a long time ago as that. It was actually, I was in Stratford. It was on a Saturday, and it's Shakespeare's birthday to sort of celebrate that. And there was a lot of police presence in the town. And I just said casually, oh, a bomb must have gone off in London. And remember, in those days, we didn't have mobile phones and all the things we have today. So I only found out when I came home late at night that day that, yes, indeed, a bomb had gone off. And it was only after the Good Friday Agreement that that level of bombing stopped.
Yeah, just let me clarify. Stratford is the birthplace of, can you give a little description about that, the festival that we have, so that students can connect to it?
Okay. So, so on the Monday, when I went back to work, and Bishopsgate, where our office was, had been bombed, and there were all these people, sort of, the repair work had started. So here is it, City Slickers. Helmeted musclemen gliding on steel escalators in the city, bomb-proof buildings against terrorists, spacewalking on huge walls of glass, they examine me as they would any other lass. Smiling, they take a random walk, unafraid of vertigo, like the stock market index raring to go. Who said men seldom make passes at women with glasses? Real men do, particularly at women in city offices. Cubicles now shatterproof hold fragile egos. Men in dark grey suits shuffle in corporate shoes. Pinstripe suits come and go, talking of PE ratio. Top down, bottom up methods of the intelligent investor. As I mend the rules of the old boys' network and demand my share of the profits of my work, I hit the invisible glass ceiling each time I stand up for myself as if that was a crime. A single Indian female, I am trapped, alas, in a cage of bomb-proof, shatterproof glass. The Jurassic laws in the city continue to spawn dinosaurs that even Spielberg cannot improve upon. Next time these helmeted musclemen blow me a kiss, I will signal to them to rescue a woman in distress.
Very nice.
So I thought I might read Shadi.com actually.
Yeah, Shadi.com is a very nice poem.
Well,
I
go
must
ahead.
add here that Shanta's poems are very simple, but they have very deep meaning, and few of her poems have a twist to it. So this is one of such poems, which is Shadi.com. I remember reading it in a winter evening, and I felt so jubilant about it that it was very nice. So her poems are really act as tonics for women like us, I guess.
Well, I was told that I really should sort of make an effort to find a partner. And so I thought, I don't really believe in internet dating, but there we are. I thought, why not? And then Shadi.com was the Indian site. So there we are. My ideal partner would be someone like myself, preferably never married, will settle for divorced or widowed with children with the right chemistry. Tall, dark, slim, and romantic, must have a good sense of humor. Kind, understanding, generous, loyal, trustworthy, goes without saying. Financially, emotionally secure, well educated, thoughtful, a man of action he must be. Non smoker, occasional drinker, must enjoy good food, but be prepared to eat anything unless he wants to cook. Must like reading, traveling, have a passion for life. Religion? A Brahmin would be nice, but not essential. I wrapped my expectations with a neat summation. Don't have a fixed idea of what I want, but know that when we meet, I will know, and so will he. Having spent one balmy summer evening registering, I decided to cool off with a glass of chilled champagne, thinking of the beautiful boy doing his best in time. But I received a response straight away. No matches found. Change your criteria. Be realistic. That my ideal man was not found was a blow, I confess. It doesn't mean such a man does not exist, I reasoned, pulling my self esteem back into harness. He is simply not registered with this agency. Having determined to do something about it, I persisted in my pursuit of Mr. Almost Right. Must try other agencies, cast my net wider. Meanwhile, no harm in checking out what's on offer. Be less fussy. Let karma in on such a deep matter. Age doesn't matter. Marital status doesn't matter. Children doesn't matter. Country of residence doesn't matter. Height doesn't matter. Education doesn't matter. Religion doesn't matter. Occupation doesn't matter. I was inundated with suitors, crushing my computer. Well, I was thinking, are there any further questions, or are we coming close to, is it the ending
Yeah,
almost?
yeah, maybe one or two more poems and then we will call it.
Okay. I will read from the new book, which I've already read one, What Survives is the Singing.
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe if a paragraph from your story, A World Elsewhere.
ah, um, okay, you can read that. I don't know. This would be a slightly serious poem in the sense that the the high level of sort of violence against women in India bothers me, and I have written various poems about it. And it is worrying. It's not just in India, but it's just at the level. I mean, even in the UK, I think historically this is before lockdown. Two women were killed by their partners every week, and that is unacceptable. So here is this poem I wrote. I have written several. I wrote one about Nirbhaya, and this is called "Can You Hear Our Screams?" And this is sort of most of you will know the background to this as well. A chirping bird who ran like a deer was how her mother described the 8-year-old whose broken body was found in the bushes. The day she went missing, the horses returned without her, giddy with scanning the horizon. No one heard their screams. For every girl cracked open like a coconut, in temples, homes, palaces, or public spaces, hundreds more lie buried in basements and attics. Unmarked graves in gardens, forests, and fields, their souls crying out for justice. Can you hear their screams? When daughters disappear into earth, water, fire, discarded at birth with the afterbirth, flushed into toilets, poured into sewers, disposed in more ways than you can imagine, frozen in islands haunted by nightmares, their prayers turn into screams. No record exists of how many are kidnapped, raped, enslaved, starved, burnt and mutilated, left in bin bags, recycled with the refuse. Not in the national statistics, in gold plated genealogies, pages of misogyny in the archives of history. Can you hear their screams? The world may be moving closer to the edge of reckoning as women keep marching to the roar of injustices trapped in their limbs, erupting like volcanoes that will no longer lie dormant or become extinct. Can you hear our screams? And this poem is called "In Silence," and it's a ghazal. When fate deals you a losing hand, play in silence. Luck favors those who mend themselves in silence. Remember precious lessons learnt in defeat, pearls of experience purchased in silence. A game of chance, nothing in this world is real, our stories, shadows passing in silence. Be the flame of a candle to what blows you. Life is the greatest gift bestowed in silence. Days are restless until your heart finds a home, a sky where you can be yourself in silence. Earth's grand gardens may beckon you in your dreams. Love's a patch of green that flowers in silence. a shade that shelters you in times of crises, a place you keep returning to in silence. To hold, be held, the beloved eternal, believe in the splendor of grace in silence. Silence is the keeper of keys to secrets, Shanti that passes understanding in silence.
Lovely.
I don't know, from the novel, I wouldn't know where to read. It is, that's the thing with novels, is that well, this is the world elsewhere.
Yeah. This is the novel which is critically acclaimed, and this is the first novel I think it was she wrote,
Yeah,
and she's writing her second novel now. So just before we end, maybe a glimpse of that.
I think it's just, I'll read just the beginning really, because it's just, there are a lot of issues I raise in this novel because it's based in Orissa, and that Orissa has changed. Some of it good, some of it not that good. So, and it begins with it's the mother called Karuna. It's the story is about. Okay, now I have a comment from Navriti. Thank you, Navriti. I hope you will read the poem. It's actually been published in various journals. I don't know. Hi.
She's asking you a question. She's
Yeah.
asking you whether she's put it in the chat box.
Okay. Can you say what it is?
Navriti, hi Navriti, can you pose your question yourself? Is your line clear?
Yes.
A
Ma'am,
feminist writer. Ah,
congratulations to
okay.
you and to Acharya. I'm very interested.
I think,
And my question, like, ma'am, you just
yeah, I'll read it from the chat box because your voice
hello, ma'am.
not very clear. The
Writing. Yeah.
audio is not very clear, so I will take it. So she's asking you, Shanta, would you characterize yourself as a feminist writer?
I think the simple answer is yes, because I'm a woman, and other people call me feminist, but I think unfortunately the status of women is still such that everything I write is feminist, because I don't know, it is, you can't not be a feminist if you're a woman. But then, I don't go out and say I'm this great feminist writer, but everything I write about, a lot of it has to do with injustice and uh, inequalities. And so, yes, short answer is yes.
So then if you're writing on different themes and you are writing it as a woman, right?
Well, I am a woman, so
But
I
are you
am writing
conscious of
about
the
from my point of view.
No, but the thing is that are you conscious about the fact that you're a woman and hence you're writing, or it just comes naturally or unconsciously? That's
It's natural, I think. I mean, I understand well, the other perspective is the male gaze and the male perspective, and I don't sort of sort of categorize, but it is a different point of view that sometimes uh, men don't actually understand, and I mean, I'm sure we have, we also don't understand everything, because it's not possible. It's 80-80. At the end of the day, we are all limited. But it is how you try to approach the world, and how much of you, of the way you define yourself, embraces others. A lot of people are very, very self-centered. I mean, okay, if yourself includes the whole world, that's fine. But it is very hard unless you make an effort to understand the other person's point of view. It's I think that's how we are made, actually. But human beings, I believe, I would like to believe, have a great ability in empathizing with others. So this empathy is a huge human asset, which we must try to use more. But I think that if your emphasis is on just, if your self is narrow, if you define yourself as a narrow sort of being, then obviously it will sort of limit you. So to try to see things from different perspectives, and you will be enriched in the process. And that's what I mean by working in the city. I have been enriched because I see things from so many different perspectives, which I may not have seen if I had stayed in academia. And so, to that extent, it's a blessing. It's not so much the money, it's the way I see the world. Okay, well, I'll just read the beginning of this, where the story I'm trying to write is about the evolution of a girl. A girl is born in Orissa and her life. It is slightly autobiographical, but it's not a memoir. So I'm trying to, because I chose that because Orissa, when I left India, was still among the second poorest state in India, and the choices available to a female child. It all obviously depends on your parents and family and their ability, but it was. So the story begins with the birth of Asha and her mother. She's the person who's saying that, how much longer do you plan to stay in here? Karuna whispered as she circled her right palm over her stomach. It had grown larger than the largest pumpkin she had seen. She felt the fetus move as if in reply. Tight as a drum, her skin was stretched thin. She could see the veins branching out like a map of the Deccan Delta. Karuna was getting dressed after her morning bath. She wiped the sweat off her forehead with the anchal of her cotton pasapali sari. Woven in red, white, black, and yellow, they represented the colors of Lord Jagannath. She sighed in sympathy, knowing why her child had chosen to spend a little bit longer inside her. Well, that's just the first paragraph of the book.
Beautiful, beautiful. Bringing in Jagannath, bringing in Pasapalli sari and everything. So wonderful. My last question to you before we end. You have been translated into many languages, including Chinese and other languages. Have you, have you understood your poem in that language? Means, are you able to read, not even
Really, no, okay, only in Hindi, Bengali, and no. But I don't know those languages, so I wouldn't. Even in French, my poem translates, and I know a little bit of French, but I still couldn't tell you myself. I mean, I've asked my friends who know French, but is this translation good? That poem, Can You Hear Our Screams, is translated into French. And they tell me that yes, it's a good translation, but I wouldn't know. In fact, this issue of translation is interesting because even somebody as big as De Gaulle, he was a very liberal sort of a human being, and he allowed anybody to translate his work, and some of the translations were terrible. And but he understood English. It's not as if he didn't understand English. And his own translations of Gitanjali, for which he won the Nobel Prize, I think are excellent. So translation is an issue. Yeah.
Yeah, so we are, Navriti is trying to do a project on poetry, and she is trying to motivate students to write in English and French, and perhaps translate, kind of French to English, English to French. So that's why, and we are all trying to do some kind of translation or sorts from the Indian languages to English, or
Yeah, I
from.
was going to say that Indian languages, there's a wealth of writing there, and we don't have good translators. And so there's something waiting to be done there. But if you look at Western literature in Europe, there's so many good translations of, and it's not just one translation. The same work would have been translated by different people. So India really has to get that going, and I don't know how it will happen, but it has to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure your students will, and students like all over India, if they start that project, it will be great.
Yeah, yeah. We are trying that with French. I think Navriti is going to try it next semester with French.
So what, translate from what, Hindi to French or French to English?
I think she has some idea. It's not Hindi because we here do not have we have students all over India, from all over India. So
Yeah,
it's from, so it should be French to English or English to French that way, I guess. That's what we are trying out, and I hope, I mean, I wish her all luck. So that's the end of the session. And thank you so much, Shanta, for being here. We really, really liked to listen to you, and I hope the students will listen. Those who have not, we will, I mean, these recorded videos are always can be accessed by anyone in this. Yeah, thank you.
thank you. Thank you. No, I would also like to thank you, Gopa, for inviting me. It's a very interesting project. Very few people invite me to talk about both poetry and investing. So that was good. And if your students who, if I can help in any way, they should feel free to get in touch.
Yeah, yeah. And for others, Santa's work have been books have been PhD dissertations also. So she has been researched widely. So anyone who wants to read and research, most open to do it, and she is very helpful, as the author would, any author would be, but she is more than that. With that note, thank you again, and yes, it's late. It's going to be end of an evening for us, but I think you have the whole day with you. So have a nice day, Shanta.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, bye.
And thank you all for coming here, my colleagues and students. And I hope you had a nice evening. Right? Bye. Good night, all. शुभम जी लाइव बंद कर दीजिएगा जरा.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So you